Hi, thank you for joining us today here at Ecosperity and what we have to share. My name is David from SMBC, and with me is Joel from Lendlease.
Hi everyone. I know everyone's just coming out of your plenary session, so do join us, come and take a seat, and we'll be happy to share what we've got in store for you in the next 20 minutes.
That's right. So our talk today is about greening the built environment, developing change. And it's set against the backdrop of the construction industry's need to digitalize, to become greener, and get over its post-COVID hangover, because there are issues out there that's facing the industry. We are going to be focusing on innovative financing and how, through collaborative efforts, we can bring about sustainable change and help green the construction industry. At SMBC, this is becoming ever more urgent. I always say we cannot front-run our customers. While we have put out our goals here, and not just from our Scope 1, Scope 2 by 2030, how we conduct our business and lower our own carbon footprint, by 2050, it becomes vitally important who we bank and how we bank them. And hopefully, then we have to be on this journey together, because to be net zero for our entire loan and investment portfolio is a massive task. If people don't know, SMBC is one of the largest banks in the world, and we're certainly one of only 20 global SIFI banks. So we need your support. We need the industry support, because real estate, as many of you will know, is 39% of all GHG emissions, within which 11% is actually the built environment. What is embodied carbon, which I know Joel will talk a lot more about. But beyond that, real estate is also one of the few industries that have not really digitalized. And I think we can do this hand in hand, and I think we've got a great financing solution to help bring this about together. So actually, Joel, whilst we want to do net zero, you actually have a much bigger ambition.
Well, so we've got, well, you can see here, it's our Mission Zero campaign or Mission Zero target. So we basically have two targets here. One is getting to net zero carbon for Scope 1 and 2 by FY25. Not long now, we've got maybe 6 months to go for the start of our FY. And absolute zero by 2040, and that's Scopes 1, 2, and 3. These are probably the most aggressive targets the industry has seen to date. At Lendlease, we're an integrated property developer. We're based out of Sydney, Australia, but we have footprint all around the world in major gateway cities. And of course, the challenges in different cities are different, right? And in Asia Pacific, our problems and challenges are very well known. You can understand from here, of course, the topic here is about construction. A significant amount of our Scope 3 emissions actually are from construction. Right? And what we believe is this, our industry is ready to transform. You saw earlier there was some commentary about hard to abate sectors. We like to reposition this, right? We are ready to abate. I think if we don't start doing something now, it will be far too late. And we really need to think differently about some of our challenges here. But before we do that, we really need to know what is the scale of our challenge here. You see here, these are some numbers, and we disclose all these to the public. You see here, this is actually our emissions profile. We talk about Scope 1 and 2 net zero. Honestly, it is only a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of our total emissions. The bulk of it actually comes from Scope 3. And I know people out here, as developers, will often think, oh, well, it's actually really hard to influence. But can you imagine if developers say that to ourselves? We're at the top of the food chain.
Correct.
We cannot say that to ourselves. We have the power to influence through specifications, through our tender process, through supply chain partnering, and influencing this huge amount that we have here. And if you think about that, over 90% is in Scope 3, and over 60-something% is in the materials that we buy, and the bulk of it is actually down to your top 4 materials: concrete, steel, aluminium, and glass. And we look at a typical profile of our carbon emissions for a building. We've conducted life cycle assessments on most of our projects now. You can see for a typical building with a concrete frame, hybrid system, looking at steel steel flooring, etc., this is the kind of profile you see. If it's a steel structure, obviously concrete and steel, their spots will switch. But essentially, that's the key materials that we are talking about, and we need to decarbonize it very quickly. And of course, we talk about challenges, lots of them, and this is essentially how we're breaking it down, looking at it challenge by challenge, right? The first one is really cooperation is key. How do we partner with global alliances and making sure that we are partnering with like-minded companies who are doing similar things. So we've signed up to Responsible Steel, that essentially has published standards for steel mills to improve their sustainability performance. We've also signed up to Steel Zero, which is a global commitment. We have to halve the emissions that's coming out from our steel products by 2030. Most of the other members have signed on to a 2050 target to get to net zero steel, but because of our 2040 target, we've committed to net zero steel by 2040. We can't do it alone. We need everyone to demand the same things as us, right? And the second part is, data. We talked about data gaps, we talked about disclosure, we talked about the lack of transparency in the system. We are asking for that in our supply chain. We've started talking about EPDs in this market about 3 years ago. None of our suppliers had EPDs. Some of them didn't even know what EPDs were. Fast forward 2.5, 3 years later, every one of our major suppliers from steel, concrete, aluminum, and glass have an EPD.
Actually, just for everybody's benefit, what is an EPD?
EPD is like a nutritional label on your product for carbon. So it stands for Environmental Product Declaration. Thanks for that. And two other things that we've done, we've set minimum standards for sustainability performance for all our new developments, as well as for refurbishment work. I think if there's any place that you can do it in is in Asia. We like to follow rules, and if we set a minimum standards, generally people will comply. And the other thing that we did was to demand for life cycle assessment from all our new developments as well. Of course, that's all very nice, at a high level, regional level. We've also started working with Singapore Green Building Council on writing very practical guides on helping our construction industry in collecting data, collecting information. How do you actually track the diesel used at your site? And yesterday there was the launch of the Singapore Emissions Factor Registry.
Yes.
I think that will definitely help the industry a lot.
No, thank you very much. I think as we look at, from a banking perspective, how we've seen the green bond market, part of green finance, right, mature. We've seen green loans. We've seen sustainability-linked loans. I think the next iteration of how we can help, and I will first apologize for my next slide. It is going to be quite complicated. I'm going to stand up and walk you all through it. So, this is a green working capital financing solution. It tracks back to a rather old banking product called a letter of credit. So nothing phenomenal, but what we're able to do these days is take a letter of credit, make it a transferable letter of credit, right? Put it onto a digital platform where we can then track and trace all things that come into a new development. So let's say Lendlease got a new project, right? At the very top of the house, that's a special purpose vehicle you'll set up with your project owner, right? Then we have the main contractor who will then typically, once they know there's a development loan, just get a budget, timelines, and they get around to it. The developer largely steps back from the whole process. You're no longer typically interested in what goes into the building. What we propose to do here and how we then talk about greening, digitalizing, and also bringing liquidity into the market. So just let me step back for a second. What's been happening in Singapore over the last 3 years? Coming out of COVID, there have been a lot of contractors, subcontractors, and the distributors of building materials. There have been a lot of liquidity issues. And anybody who knows the market, there's a lot of money stuck here, and sometimes gets dissipated all over the place, and the people here are the last to get paid. You might have read in the news a few subcontractors have gone under. and people have had to, like HDB, appoint new contractors to step in to do the work. This will also solve for that. So what we do here is, working with the main contractor and the developer, determine exactly who is buying what and where it's coming from. In your typical letter of credit, you'll have a certificate of origin, EPD, complete with a second party opinion certification, right? So if you say, I want green steel, and the green steel must come from this factory, there is very little opportunity for anybody to say, nah, it's okay, I'm going to buy the cheaper steel from that side and pretend it's this green steel and it goes into this building. I think you've done some really wonderful work in terms of net zero buildings, and there's going to be a first net zero building in Singapore that you're involved in. This will be critical in helping track and trace everything that goes in there. Then through the EPD, you get your carbon intensity certificate, and you can work out exactly how much carbon, embodied carbon, is going into the building. So that when you go to buy the compliance credits to bring it to net zero, this will stand the test of time and all sorts of scrutiny. I think this is going to be absolutely fundamental. And this is going to be brand new. No other bank's doing this right now. And we're certainly looking for people that we can partner with to make this happen. Because like I said, this will be all on a digital platform. It'll save people a lot of time, especially for bigger projects. It will enable the tracking and tracing of what embodied carbon is going into every new project. And through this system, there's no leakage of monies. Every cent, a development loan and from the developer, everything stays within this ecosystem. And all these people, they're protected. There's nobody that's going to be able to run away with any sum of money, go under and put other people into trouble. So it's actually a very simple solution. It does take upfront work, it does take investment, but upfront. But done right, this will drive a lot of cost savings for everybody. One, it will green the system, and the right parties that are willing to invest in sustainability will get the investment and the money, right? Less leakage. But more importantly, I think over time, what we find, and this is consistent in most all countries, at the top of the food chain here, the developers typically are the best credits. These people typically are less, how should I say, well rated from a credit perspective. So their borrowing cost typically is higher. When they have a letter of credit to borrow money against, I am fairly certain they will get a much better rate of financing. And it works for the banks as well, because these days, and what we're going through right now, we want that certainty. And to be able to provide financing against a letter of credit, I think will add a lot of comfort into the system and bring that liquidity where it's needed. Now, Joelle,
Thank you so
I know
much.
you've not bought into this just yet, but
Yeah, we've not bought into this, but I can see how this would be very advantageous for companies, right? You know, imagine these are the guys with the lowest kind of credit rating, and they usually have the most challenges with liquidity and cash flow. I think it really does solve the problems kind of embedded in the system.
if they know they have access to something like this, they might even revise their pricing downwards. Because if they factor in their cost of funding, right, this will give them a huge discount, and hopefully they might be able to pass that part of that discount on to yourselves. Let's see. Hopefully.
And just on cost, right? I mean, we were having this conversation right before this about where do you want to place your cost? Obviously, it will cost more. I can't, you know, people always walk up to me and ask me, oh, you know, you're using low carbon concrete, you're using green steel. It must cost more. I'm like, obviously, yes, it does. For low carbon concrete, the cost delta is something like 2 to 5%. For green steel, is 20 to 50%. It is significant for our marketplace. But how do you actually drive down the cost? Do you want the cost to be upfront in your buildings, or do you want the cost to be later when you get a stranded asset? Right, so these are the two basically cost equations that you work out on. But you know, just giving a bit of example here, this is an example from the UK where the cost premium for green steel is not that high, but what we've done is also to make it work and have a cost saving overall. What we've done is early involvement with our steel mill. In this case, it was ArcelorMittal, who is one of our strategic suppliers, and we engaged with them from a technical perspective. You know, David, you were talking about working with your entire supply chain and not stuffing them up at the end of the deal or during a tender process. This is exactly what we did. We engaged them very, very early, a year or two ahead of time, during the design process, working with them on here's the structural system that we have, and here's the optimized one that we actually would eventually get away with, right? You've got to reduce the amount of steel that you put into your structures. So, a whole bunch of stuff. We've replaced blast oxygen furnace with electric arc furnace technology, which already improves efficiencies from a technology perspective. We then substituted the energy source that's going into the steel mills with renewables. And then we also then replaced the type of steel products, right? Using Angelina beams, which essentially allows steel, your services to run through. So you've got holes in between, reduces the weight, and therefore less steel, less cost, less embodied carbon. You can see the bottom line there. Like for like, from a steel product perspective, we reduced embodied carbon by 76% from the steel product, and we saved 9% in cost because we use a higher performing one. So if you think about those learnings there from Europe, I think there are a lot of good learnings there. And how do you actually apply it in the region, right? Yeah. And this is the project that we've recently won last year with, we are in a JV partnership with Singtel, rebuilding the comm center redevelopment. I would say we threw everything at it, everything we know, everything that can be done in this marketplace, we have chucked it at this project, right? We've looked at Green Mark Platinum, net zero energy building. We've looked at carbon neutral construction delivery, so looking at electrification of all the plant and equipment. We've explored biodiesel for many of our sites now, so we know confidently that we will be using biodiesel on this site. Okay. And there are a whole bunch of stuff, but I think the most challenging part is actually embodied carbon. We've set a target looking at 30% reduction in embodied carbon based on the Singapore benchmark today. And because we know there's actually not enough data transparency there, through the process, we've actually learned a lot by setting up our targets for this project, right? And, safe to say, we know it can be done. But what we hope to do is really replicate the success that we've had in other regions in Singapore and in Asia.
No, thank you, Joel. I think it's really, really exciting to see how one project can help lead the way and taking learnings from your previous project as well. I like to think, as with what's been discussed in Ecosperity, a number that's thrown around as well yesterday, $1.5 trillion of investment required to get us to where we need to be. A lot of that goes to infrastructure. So not just with real estate, but infrastructure as well. I know Singapore as a government, we've got a very nice drawn out Green Plan 2030. We've got the Long Island project. We've got huge developments coming up like Changi Airport that follows what we've done in Tuas. A lot of these things, there's every opportunity to create that demand that will energize, I hope, all the building materials manufacturers, suppliers, the contractors, that there is a better way. Because what we need to do is come together to solve the paradox of the air conditioning, right? The more we build, the hotter it gets. The hotter it gets, the more we need to build. We cannot allow for that to happen. So if I may just sort of quickly wrap up for the end of the session, 3 takeaways, guys. The construction industry plays a key role in reducing carbon emissions. 39%, that's where we are. So everything that we do will have a material impact. And I hope then everybody will be embracing sustainable practices as a must. Immediate action is essential, as Joel mentioned, right? There's long lead times here. And I think even just to say to a steel manufacturer, what more can you do, right, to green your process, that's going to be absolutely key. And then the thing I like to put out to yourselves is long-term commitment to sustainability can drive down cost. There is a cost efficiency here that can be realized, but we need to make that long-term commitment. We've got 20 seconds left, Joel. Thank you very, very much for participating in this, joining us on the stage of this Action Hub. Some great insights. Let me just share one last slide with our contacts. So if anybody would like to, speak with us or share an idea, please do reach out. Thank you once again.
Thank
And
you.
have a great day.